Fala, rapaziada, no Talkeshi de hoje tá um pouquinho diferente, inclusive a gente vai ter que falar um pouquinho em inglês aqui com o Matt, que é desenvolvedor de League of Legends, mas eu vou deixar ele se apresentar e vamos conversar um pouquinho sobre toda a temporada de 2025, quais as novidades e as coisas que a gente pode esperar aqui. Então vamos embora, que agora a gente vai trocar ideia com ele. Vamos nessa.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Matthew Frogson Long Harrison. I'm the lead gameplay designer for League, and I've been at Riot for 10 years now.
Wow.
Well, actually a little over 10 years, yeah. I started as an intern in 2014 on the balance team, and yeah, I gradually worked my way up and became the gameplay lead. Yeah, so excited to talk to you all.
Matt, a gente viu recentemente, né, o lançamento da Mel aqui na LTA Sul e, pô, a gente tá vendo que a Riot tá tentando encontrar novas maneiras dos campeões terem novidades pro público, mas ao mesmo tempo tem que tomar um certo cuidado para as coisas não saírem muito de controle. Por exemplo, o W da Mel reflete habilidade, o Xante joga a pessoa pela parede e vai tirar um X1, o Huey tem um monte de skill na mesma skill. Qual que é o desafio de encontrar novas maneiras do jogador jogar o LoL e ter essas novidades, mas ao mesmo tempo não esculhambar tudo e deixar uma coisa muito quebrada?
Yeah, definitely. So it's always a constant challenge we have to add new champions to the game. You know, it's not particularly exciting to add a champion to the game that doesn't really bring anything new and unique. What we care a lot about is experiential uniqueness. So does it feel unique to play? You know, someone like Lilia, for example, doesn't really bring anything new to the game in terms of mechanics. You know, she had Zoe's sleep, but she did bring something experientially different, which is that she's really fast and she's a melee champion that has these types of abilities. Sometimes, though, we will bring completely new mechanics like Mel's Reflect or Viego's, body stealing and things like that. So we want to try and strike the balance of experiential uniqueness and mechanical uniqueness. There's a good amount of these types of champions that we want to release on a certain cadence. You know, we wouldn't want to always be creating Mel's or Silas's or Viegos, but every now and then it's pretty exciting. So that's kind of our strategy. We always want the champion to at least feel experientially different or hit an audience that is not currently being served well. And sometimes that will be something completely new. Yeah.
E falando então sobre esses novos lançamentos, mas tem uma coisa que eu pelo menos tenho a perspectiva disso, que esses novos campeões, todos eles estão recebendo um mini reworkzinho conforme o tempo vai passando. A ult da Aurora agora, você toma slow em vez de ficar preso lá. O Xante teve vários remakes dentro do kit dele. O Smolder também mudou muita coisa. Ele tinha uma itemização de um jeito, mudou o jeito de destacar. Muita coisa muda. Essa nova adição de novos elementos, etc., isso pega vocês de surpresa pela relação dos players encontrarem jeitos de jogar que vocês não imaginavam e o porquê que tá acontecendo tanto desses pequenos reworks?
It takes a very skilled development team to be able to both create something new and expectation breaking for players without running into situations where we would need to update them quickly. I think we've done a pretty decent job of creating new experiences, but having said that, players get a lot more information in the first hour of playing the game than we would in an entire Champions dev cycle. We do try our best to make sure that we've spotted all the edge cases or how the champions would be optimized, but ultimately part of making new champions is taking a risk with some things, and we want to make sure we're taking calculated risks. But in a roster of 170 champions, trying to make something that feels new and unique always carries with it some amount of risk. So I wouldn't say that most of the time we're very surprised about some of the outcomes, but I would say that sometimes the magnitude of which things show up, we can only ever make our best guess at it. So, for example, like
E a gente falou da Mel, pelo menos a minha perspectiva aqui era de que ela seria pra suporte. E quando vocês vão criar um campeão aí, no que vocês pensam primeiro? É na lore? É na habilidade? O que passa na cabeça de um cara que vai criar um campeão do zero? No que vocês olham primeiro pra criar esse boneco?
Champions can be concepted from many different places. Sometimes it might be a theme first thing. So, for example, it might be like, hey, we want to make the Ruined King, or we want to make Yasuo's brother. Or for Mel, it might be like, hey, we want to make Mel from Arcane. And in the case of Mel from Arcane, we knew that she had these abilities to stop projectiles in some way. You know, obviously at the end of season one, we had to find a way working with the Arcane team to figure out, okay, how is Mel actually going to stop this projectile from killing everybody in the room? And so that's kind of a combination of the theme and the mechanical need that we started with Mel. We also try and take into consideration which roles have received a champion recently. You know, we know that roles can be very excited by, oh, yes, I'm getting a mid laner this year, or yes, we're getting a support this year. And we knew that Mel was always going to resonate at least with mid laners and supports. So we did try to figure out, okay, is she going to be better as a mid laner or better as a support? We actually tried a lot of different versions of Mel that involved a more supportive kit, like giving allies a reflect and giving allies these like special shields and these types of things. Because in Arcane she plays a little more of a supportive role. She has a bit more of those capabilities, but we just found that the core idea that we were iterating towards, which was the spell reflect, the one that was, you know, very exciting for the dev team, um, didn't end up being sustainable in the support role. So we kind of made the call that we would pivot her to being a mid laner, like a pretty safe mid laner that has uh, a pretty easy mastery curve so that she's easy to get into, because we know that a lot of people watching Arcane will want to come and play League because of Mel. So we didn't want to make her a super difficult champion. Um, so yeah, all of that is to say, like, each champion tends to follow a very different path in terms of how it's concepted, and that's roughly the process how we got to Mel having a personal spell reflect that was a mid laner.
Matt, tem muito jogador casual que às vezes ele acompanha o time dele, acompanha um jogador favorito, e aí a gente tem essa temporada de Noxus entrando em Summoner's Rift. Explica um pouco pra esse jogador que não é aquele que é vidrado, que tá todo dia acompanhando. Noxus vai ficar pro ano todo. Qual o porquê da escolha de Noxus pra começar a temporada de 2025?
Yeah, so Noxus is only going to be here for season one. You know, we have other things in store for the rest of the year. I'm not going to spoil it for you all on, on what that is, so you'll just have to wait and see. But in terms of what we were doing for Noxus, you know, we started from this idea of, hey, we like the idea of these seasonal themes. This is something that players have been um, showing some amount of excitement for example, like with you know, like previous map accents and whatnot. And we were like, oh, okay, well, we're developing these capabilities and having these types of seasonal thematics and tying it all together with a narrative, kind of similar to the old days of, you know, doing a Spirit Blossom event or doing um, you know, Sentinels of Light or these types of events. What if they were a lot more integrated into all of the things that we do in the League ecosystem? That was kind of the concepting idea behind it, and there were a lot of brainstorming meetings that we had about, okay, well, what would be the right thematic for this? And we ended up arriving on Noxus as like the best, you know, core Runeterra expression of, you know, we could do cool seasonal things in Summoner's Rift. We could do cool things in the mode space. You know, we just announced that Arena's coming back in the Noxus fighting pits, for example. We could do an overarching narrative with Artican and those types of things. So it really was a culmination of how can we best activate all aspects of the League ecosystem to deliver on this seasonal thematic. Yeah.
Matt, tem um jogador aqui no Brasil que é o Carioca. Ele tem muita experiência já, joga há bastante tempo, inclusive em um dos melhores times que a gente tem aqui na região. Mas ele falou uma coisa que é curioso. Eu acho que os jogos hoje em dia estão muito sangrentos, tem muita coisa pra você lutar, e ele e o próprio time acabam ficando um pouco confuso, porque uma hora você tem larva, aí você tem a segunda larva, tem dragão, tem torre, tem atacante, tem barão. Essa é a temporada e o resultado que vocês queriam com essa temporada de Noxus. E também fala um pouco pra mim sobre esse Atacan, que aqui no competitivo da LTA Sul a gente vê muito o Atacan do Anjo Guardião e menos o Atacan Devastador. Dá pra encontrar esse balanço? O que pode ser feito aí pra gente ter um balanço um pouquinho melhor do Atacan?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the ideas that we started out with, kind of in the middle of last year when we were iterating through what could we do as seasonal changes for Noxus, we kind of arrived on these ideas of making team play more structured and a little more, um, I guess, coordinated and bloody in that respect. And, you know, ultimately, we wanted to strike the balance between delivering something that is thematically resonant. So like Noxus is all about like conquest and fighting and showing your dominance and that type of thing. And that's kind of how we arrived on things like the feats of strength or things like Articon. And we also kind of backed into these ideas that we wanted to find a way to make pro play more exciting. And a lot of the Articon iterations were kind of done in service of that. So, for example, we wanted Voracious Articon to be a lot more about, um, in a game that's pretty stale, how can we have this Otacon objective drive action essentially. And feats of strength was a lot about, hey, we noticed that there are some games, especially pro games, that are pretty slow in terms of teams wanting to take proactive action and do that. So we wanted to find ways that generally hit the seasonal thematic of teams are conquesting and taking proactive action, while also solving some gameplay problems like lack of bloodiness in pro or disorganization in the early game and things like that. Um, I would say there's still a lot of improvements that we can make to the
Okay.
space, obviously, and players have expressed a lot of thoughts about how game warping, um, you know, the Voracious Articon's GA buff has been in particular. Ultimately, if a game is like 0-0 or something at 20 minutes, you need to do something pretty drastic to have teams um, take action or have incentives to take action in those cases. So we're still trying to find the right balance between what feels the right amount of game warping to players and viewers and what feels like it's going to create those action incentives that we like. Because, no one likes pro games being 0-0 at 20 minutes, for example.
Matt, o LoL tem uns 170 campeões, né? E aí a gente tem algumas coisas, alguns campeões, algumas rotas que parece que não tem tanta opção assim para algumas funções, tipo engage de suporte. Você tem Rel, Nautilus, Leona, um Alistar, e aí depois já começa a aparecer pouco. O Fearless está ajudando a Riot e a comunidade a entender que pode ter mais opções nesse leque, e se vocês concordam com essa visão de que algumas rotas em específico, algumas funções em específico para ser melhor, ela tá um pouquinho limitada em questão de opção?
Yeah, so on Fearless Draft, it's definitely helping us a lot. We're super happy and excited about how Fearless Draft has turned out so far, and it's really spiced up a lot of those kind of pocket picks in the series. Even just the aspect of it being more like a roguelike problem to solve. In game 5, it's like, oh, well, the texture of the pick ban has just changed because of the picks that were played in the previous version. It's just a more exciting version of Pro, we think. The question about lack of champions in certain roles, one of the reasons I think you know earlier to the point about how we choose champions and what we make, it's a bit of a tough problem in the sense that you can make something that's popular. For example, like we know that there are a lot of players that love playing mages, right? So it's like, from a player perspective, it might be like, hey, we're making the most number of people happy by making another mage, for example, right? Because there's a lot of people who are mages. We might make a lot less people happy by making, for example, like a melee enchanter or something, right? Like
Okay.
not super popular, right? Um, but the game might need more melee enchanters. So, we want to try and strike the right balance between making bets that, um, we know are going to be popular, but tend to homogenize the roster and make a lot of champions that are very similar to each other, versus making things that we know might be a little less popular, but make the roster more diverse. So that's always just a
A
counterbalancing
balance, right?
conversation that we need to have. And I do think that some items in our champion roadmap ought to be things that are less popular and just improve the game along those aspects. And some are meant to be, like bangers that are like broadly popular across many different player segments and roles. So it just needs to be a good balance between the two. Yeah.
Cara, eu vou ser bem honesto que a perspectiva do viewer vendo lane swap eu acho que é um pouquinho estragada. A gente não gosta muito dessa parada de lane swap acontecendo demais. Qual que é a perspectiva da Riot? O que vocês têm de visão? É uma coisa que talvez não dê pra tirar do jogo, simplesmente vai acontecer. A gente viu fortificação na torre do top aparecendo e mesmo assim o lane swap acontecendo no cenário competitivo. Qual que é a perspectiva da Riot? Vocês entendem essa frustração do viewer de ter que ver um lane swap o jogo todo, às vezes numa série?
I think we still do intend to resolve lane swaps, but we need to strike the balance between resolving it for pro players and harming the readability of the game by adding a lot of complex rules for regular players. Um, so that is ultimately the core issue. I think one of the things that's been challenging is that lane swaps have been viable in this manner for a pretty long time. When we talk to pro players, it's like, hey, if you had the knowledge that you do now, would you have lane swapped 4 years ago? And most of them would say yes, right? So there is certainly a difficulty there insofar as like pro players aren't even doing what is optimal necessarily, right? So we still intend to resolve these, but we just need to strike the right balance between a solution that we're happy with and one that doesn't make the game a lot more complex for regular players. Thank you all to everybody who's from the LTA region and supporting the LTA scene. Obviously, we care a lot about esports, and we're very supportive of especially the very fervent and passionate fans in those regions. So yeah, it's thanks to you all that League is alive and thriving and feels exciting to come to work on every day. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. E é isso, rapaziada. A gente vai ficando por aqui. Depois dessa entrevista aí com o Matt, fica de olho nas redes sociais, aqui no nosso canal também do LTA. Tem mais Talkeshi, mais novidade toda semana aqui pra vocês. Tamo junto. É nóis.